Welcome to the podcast where we take a deep dive into the stories behind construction business leaders. We will share how they got started, how they found success, and the lessons learned along the way. I'm your host, Eric Fortenberry. Welcome to Builder Stories. Welcome back, everybody. Today I'm here with Chris Moore, who is the owner of Senior Remodeling Experts. They are located in Salem, Virginia. Really excited to have you on the show here, Chris. Welcome to Builder Stories.
Awesome, Eric. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you give us a little bit of your background? I mean, you've been with us for several years now. I think you might have started with another company name. Kind of said you may be going through some rebranding, stuff like that. But before we get into all that, I mean, just how'd you get into construction? What led you to start your business?
Okay, so way back in 1986, I am sitting in the employment office in Palm Springs, California, and I needed a few dollars in my pocket, and a call came in for a helper, and the contractor was a guy by the name of Karl Hasek, and he was Czechoslovakian. He was classically trained as a pattern maker and a master builder, and he was building his last edition, and then he was going to go off and build a boat and become a commercial fisherman in Alaska. That was going to be his retirement. And in the 4 months that I worked for Karl, I just learned more about construction than you know most people learn in a lifetime. It was a great foundation. There was one day we had this glue lamb beam delivered. It was like 6 inches wide and 22 inches tall and 25 feet long. And they delivered it and set it on the garage floor. And, there was just the two of us, and the garage walls were 10 feet tall. And I'm looking at that beam and how in the world are we going to get this beam on top of that wall? And he didn't seem concerned about it. And there were a bunch of like Muscle Beach guys that kept calling on the young lady that lived next door. And one day when several of them were walking by, he just casually said, "I bet you guys can't lift this beam and set on top of that wall." They said, "Oh yeah, we can." And so they came over and set it up there. And he said, "Huh, man, I was wrong." And I thought, wow. So, anyway, then after that, I went into like the tracks in Southern California where, it was an outdoor production, assembly line where everybody got paid by the foot. Everything was, you did one thing and you did it quickly. And so then, came back to Virginia where I grew up and, kind of did some other things for a while and worked at, a component manufacturer that made roof trusses and floor trusses and wall panels for 7 years, and as a salesman. And during that time, I said, "You know what? I'm a better carpenter than I am a salesman. I think I'm gonna get out of this sales racket." And funny thing, after I started my business, I'm like, I'm spending more time doing sales now than when I was a full-time salesman. But yeah, I started the company, Solid Rock Enterprises, based on the scripture that says the wise man built his house on the solid rock. And when the storms came, it stood up and didn't blow away. And we built one of my first projects was a custom house at Smith Mountain Lake, and got done with that house and sat down and looked at my numbers and discovered to my dismay that I had made a grand total of $6 an hour building that house.
Wow.
And so I was like, well, that's not going to work. And so one of my good customers at the trust company called me up and said, you want to frame a house for me? And so this was 2001 when I started the business. And so I framed a house for him, and then really from '01 through '08, we were pretty much a framing company. There was a lot of, big cut up houses going up, and curved staircases and round turrets. And one house had 8 different pitches on the roof. It was a stick-built roof, and we had, curved eaves. We had to cut the curves out of 2 by 12s and gusset them on the rafters, and that was a lot of fun. But then one day, about along 2008, all of that came to a screeching halt. And so I was, trying to find a new niche, trying to find, a way to feed my family. And about that time, my mom and dad, they've been living in a age restricted community in Arizona for probably 15 years. And my mom had a stroke, and they moved back to Virginia to be close to family. And like the day after they got here, my mom fell and broke her pelvis, and she was in the hospital, and then she was in rehab. And during that time, my dad found a house, bought a house, and so she was coming home from rehab in a wheelchair, and there were like 5 or 6 steps to get into the front door of the house and 5 or 6 steps to get up to the deck in the back. So I built my very first wheelchair ramp and put in some grab bars and some swing clear hinges and a stair lift and some other things for my mom. And that kind of got the wheels turning that I bet there's a lot of older people that are struggling in their homes. And so that started my journey into aging in place and educated myself, earned the CAPS Certified Aging in Place Specialist designation through NAHB, and just started, working on, what that looked like. And discovered very quickly there's a lot of people that need these changes but don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit it. The resistance is quite large. So I found that, family dynamics and kind of talking to people about how, making some modifications to your homes is actually a great planning tool. And um, started doing grant work for disabled veterans, which we do a lot of. And so that's when the initials SRE, which stood for Senior Remodel or Solid Rock Enterprises, could also stand for Senior Remodeling Experts. And so we tried to be both for a while. I mean, I've always had the, I'll do it kind of mentality in construction. And over the years, I've taken on a lot of projects that nobody else wanted to touch. And some of them I found out, oh, that's why nobody else wanted to touch this project. But always enjoyed the challenge. But we're doing more and more aging in place kind of work. And so we've just recently kind of made the switch to, senior remodeling experts. And so, things were going along, and 2021, I had my uh, first $1 million revenue year. We ended that year with 22% net margin, and things were really going well. And then in December of 21, um, my wife, Barbara, of 33 years, she she came down with what we thought was pneumonia, and it was right in the middle of COVID, and we didn't want to go to the hospital, so we did telehealth and antibiotic and a steroid, and then another antibiotic and another steroid, and it wasn't getting any better, and so we finally went to the hospital, and when they did a chest X-ray, they found um, she had a large tumor in her lung, and it was stage 4 lung cancer, and it had spread to her bones. And so everything came to a screeching halt. I told my team, do what you can, do the best you can, and really didn't go to the office maybe 6 times in 8 months. And um, Barbara ended up passing away the last day of July of 22. And so for the rest of 22, I was kind of just in a fog. And when I first met you, Eric, was at the very first Job Trade Connect, which was the January, right after that. And so I was I was really still in shock at that point, and just have kind of from there picked up the pieces and um, developing a company where there are systems and people in charge of different things. Because up until that point, I had everything was in my head. I was at the job site every day. I had people helping me, but I was making all the decisions. Most of them, on the fly as they came up. And that's a lot easier to do in framing than it is in, when you're doing, new builds or full service remodeling where, you have to have things ordered and you have to have things decided, way ahead of when you're going to be installing them. And so, um, then 20 last year, and then I kind of just um kind of lost focus for a while. And, I felt like things um were going okay. And then it took a couple of years to really, catch up with me. And then last year um at the end of the year and looked at the books, and we lost $100,000 last year in the business. And that was really, really, really a wake up call. And so we are just finished our second profitable quarter in a row. So we're getting things back on course. And uh, joined the Association of Professional Builders back in December, and working with them um, on some things, and on pricing, and on the work in progress accounting, and um, incorporating, trying to do a better job, utilizing JobTread. We came to JobTread. Um, we had been with Buildertrend, and before that, we were with Co-Construct. We did Co-Construct, and we're like, there's some things not working here. And then so we switched to Buildertrend, and we were still kind of feeling like, there's some things not working. And then Buildertrend tripled our price. And that was, JobTread was pretty new at that point, but we had heard about it, and called Hector at like 7:30 in the evening, and he got us, signed up with JobTread like on the spot. And um then I came to JobTread Connect, and Anna did a workshop on process mapping. And I remembered she said, "We can't fix your company. If you expect JobTread or any other software to fix all the chaos that's going on in your company, it's not gonna happen." And I realized that's what I had been expecting. I'll buy this software. Oh, well, that's not solving my problem. So I'll buy another software, and that's not solving my. And what she said was, if you can figure out what your process needs to be, what it is, what the steps are that you're going to consistently do in your operations, then we can streamline that process for you and make it easier. But that going through that process mapping and figuring out, what is our process? What do we do? What's step 1, step 2, step 3? Um, and, so that's what I've been working on. And, I feel like we've made a lot of progress. Still got a long way to go. Um, but, having that consistency, and then also figuring out just, hey, these are jobs we're good at, instead of just taking everything that comes down the pike.
Sure. Man, Chris, that's one hell of a story there. I I remember when we first met at Job Trade Connect, and I think you had maybe kind of alluded to that you had lost your wife, but, I certainly didn't know the full backstory and, just kinda hearing everything that you've overcome. I mean, man, I feel for you. I'm so sorry to hear, about that about the cancer and losing your wife. I could only imagine what that's like, and, but seeing you and how you've continued to just keep going and, you've kept building. I mean, I see a lot of people that's kind of the thing that just it ends it for them, and, they end up kinda losing the business and losing a whole lot more, and, it's, yeah, just,
Well, I give a lot of credit, to my team. My son Joey and his wife Sarah. Sarah's my office manager, and they really pull things together and kind of kept the ship afloat. And really, in especially in the um like the veterans work. I mean, the disabled veterans that we work with. I mean, we have a lot of Vietnam vets that are dealing with the aftermath of Agent Orange and some of the stuff they were exposed to. And a lot of those things are just coming to light now in terms of the effects that it's had on them.
yeah,
And so, we lose clients. We've had several that have died in the middle of our project. We've had many more that, didn't make it too long afterwards. And my my the way I deal with the widows is completely different than it was before I went through, my own loss.
sure.
And what I have learned out of coming through that is that, it's in the suffering that you grow. I mean, it's in the dry and the barren places that, your character is molded and your resilience is developed. And, I had said for years, um, and didn't had no idea at the time really what I was saying, but when there's money in the bank and everybody's healthy and the sun's shining, it's pleasant, but we're not growing. We grow, as business owners, we grow when our back's against the wall. As people, we grow when we have a decision to make. Do we do the right thing here, or do we compromise? Do we bite the bullet and take care of, and follow through on what we promised we were going to do, even, when it's painful, or, do we not? And that's how, we get molded and we become the kind of people that, we can sleep well at night, you know?
Yeah,
Um, and so it's, you know, it, at the time I would not have, said, "Oh yeah, this is to, help me with my character." But, at the end of the day, um, it's it's made me a better person.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I tell people all the time, I mean, it's, just the life of being an entrepreneur, small business owner. It's like being on a roller coaster. You got the ups and you got the downs, and it's the times that you're here, feel like you're at the rock bottom. You don't know what to do. Is it ever going to come back? Are we ever going to be able to get through this? Like, those are the moments that that they're either going to make you or they're going to break you. And when you can just keep going, keep grinding through it, keep looking for ways to adapt, overcome. Eventually, when you start pulling it back up, it's like it's those hardest times. Those are the times that, that they make, those ups and those successes, those triumphs. I mean, they make them feel that much better, and you have that much more appreciation because, like, what you came through. It's so many people kind of just look at entrepreneurs and business owners and think, man, like, they're just on the top of the world and it's been so easy, and they got everything, they got all the money, they got all the team, they just it often kind of comes across as so much different than what it really is. And it's those hard times, that's when you build the character. That's when yeah, you gotta dig deep to figure out how are we going to make it through here. it's easy for everybody to build a business and to do, great and win when it's, we got a bull market and, times are good and everyone's, got money and spending on projects and things. But man, it's those bear markets, it's those tough times, it's the down markets when that's like what really, is the test of a true business and a true business owner and leader. And I think, as we're seeing here, I mean, it's the same, whether it's in your personal or your business life. I mean, those, we are going to have really, really hard times in life, and it's how do you persevere? It's how do you overcome and, figure out how to get up every day and keep working through it. And, it sounds like you were blessed with a great team of people around you who, you could trust, and, they kept the ship afloat, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like the old saying, after 40 years of hard work, he became an overnight success.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
I mean, that's, it's such a neat story though, like hearing how, you started off, kind of doing various, different roles. I mean, even, sales and, just kind of working under someone else, and sort of that led you to realize that, you really liked the hands-on, the carpentry. You started doing the framing for a while. But then, again, just through that opportunity, or really kind of through a need, for your own mom, being able to learn that you can really make a huge impact on the people who, need the most help, physically, being able to help, with those people that are aging in place. I mean, what an incredible transition for you to go and now build this business that has so much more, purpose and probably passion for you than, I mean, I'm sure you loved framing and carpentry, but like, I mean, now like you've got that much more meaning invested in what you're doing in every single project. I mean, that's got to be like really rewarding for you.
it's incredibly rewarding. I mean, the difference we make, in people's lives. I mean, there's people that, haven't had a shower in 2 years. They can't get in the tub. And, we did a whole house remodel last year for a couple. They're in their 70s. They've lived in the house for 50 years. They love the neighborhood. Their washer and dryer was in the basement. Their basement stairs were really more like a ladder. I mean, they were so steep, and their railing consisted of a rope, literally on the side of the stairs. And so we built an addition on the back. We put a laundry center on the main floor. We redid the whole entire house. We put in an accessible bathroom. We redid their kitchen. And it just enabled them to, continue to live in the house they loved so much and was special to them.
Yeah.
And, so, I mean, yeah, it's very, very rewarding. And, I also now teach the certification class. That's a 3-day class. I do that online several times a year. As Joey, transitions into more running the day-to-day operations, I hope to do more, teaching and speaking and writing and just to be able to share, the knowledge and the wisdom and the understanding that I've been able to
Yeah, that's
glean
awesome.
and pick up over the years.
So what does your full team look like today?
There's 6 of us. Joey's doing most of the sales. Sarah's the office manager, does all the bookkeeping, answers the phone, uh, helps with, I mean, she's the job tread, um, person on our team. I think everybody on my team knows how to use job trade better than I do. I'm not, proud to say that, but, I mean, there's so much there, and I see a lot of the new features, the takeoff and the plans and all that. I really need to carve out some time to familiarize myself with those things. And then I've got a project manager, and I've got 2 carpenters, and probably looking to, um, add some more people in the field soon, because we've got probably 4 projects getting ready to start all at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And, we're working with a marketing company contractor Scale, who's out of New Zealand, and they're a partner with APV, and um, probably going to get flooded with leads there that we need to work on, and so um,
So what did it take for you, again, kind of earlier, many years ago, it was kind of you wearing all the hats, having to do the sales and the work. What did it take for you to get to the point where, you were able to bring on, was it Joey? Was that the first person that you brought on, or did you bring on a project manager? Like, how did you, take yourself out of that, wearing all the hats, to start delegating and trusting
it
others?
was tough. I mean, it's still tough for me, because my natural inclination is to just, do it myself.
Yep.
And, my youngest son, would always say, "Here's what you do, Dad." Well, okay, well, I want you to take care of this project, and here's how oh, never mind, I'll just do it myself. And that's my natural tendency. And in fact, when, in conversations with Joey, and he's like, "Well, I don't have your knowledge, I don't have your, experience." And I said, "Joey, you got to look at that as a blessing, because my ability to do the work myself probably over the years has been more of a hindrance than a help, because as long as I'm doing everything myself, I'm never going to grow. And I've found building a team to be much harder than building a house. It's just not doesn't come naturally for me. My dad used to tell me, he said, "It sounds like you're too big to be little and too little to be big." It's like way past what you can do yourself, but not quite to the point where, you've got enough work to justify the salary of other people to bring on the team. And, kind of just like jumping into the marketing with both feet when it seems scary, like, well, okay, well, if I do that, what happens if if I get 20 phone calls a day, and and that balance of bringing in more work while bringing in more capacity I mean, both of those have to rise at approximately the same level, or, you get yourself in a mess. I mean, um, having more leads come in than you can respond to in a timely manner, and people get mad at you because you're not calling them back, and you're putting all this money into marketing, but you're not able to service those prospects, I mean, that's been a fear. And so I'm kind of at the point now where it's like, I got to fish or cut bait. I've got to. I'm at the point where the business has to grow. One of the reasons that we were unprofitable last year is because, the level of overhead I have. I've got 6 people I'm paying, and really only 2 of them are like billable hours.
Sure.
Right? And so, I'm heavy on the overhead, and so the only way that I see to get that, is to increase the revenue and increase so that the percentage of that payroll is a smaller percentage of revenue. So that's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna, bite the bullet and jump in, and, you know, let the chips fall where they may. Um, and because, I've been trying to do this systems for, a couple of years now, and we've made some progress. But if you're if you're putting out fires all the time, you're out doing the things that really you could have somebody else do,
Sure.
and taking the time to focus on, the things that I'm best suited for.
Yeah.
And, we're trying to, we've got somebody, a virtual assistant doing our social media, which we've always been just, I mean, we've had it for years, but it's always been like, well, if anybody gets a minute to put a post up on Facebook, then yeah, go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
And I'm not, personally on social media at all. So it's not, you know, but we're working on that. I'm doing I'm doing instructional YouTubes right here in this chair in my library. Trying to get a couple of those a week up. Just talking about aging in place and what it entails and what people can think about. And um, I'm starting a new series called Aging in Place as a Team Sport, where we talk about, okay, we got to have the housing, but you also got to have healthcare, and you got to have, finances, and you got to have transportation, and you got to have all these other pieces to successfully, um, age in place. And so, I'm really paying attention to how you're doing this builder stories, because I like to kind of have, a similar kind of format of talking to people about, okay, well, what's your part in the puzzle?
Sure.
And, I've been in preparation for this today. I've listened to probably half a dozen, in the last week, and it's really helpful, because, you hear a lot of the same struggles, right? You hear different people's stories, and a lot of it is, we start out, and then we're like, we're just doing it. We're just getting up every day, and, you know, getting down there and building something, and then realize, oh, there's a lot more to it, um, than
Yeah.
that. I've got a friend, he's retired now, but he was a builder, and he was a CPA before he was a builder. And I learned a lot from him because he approached it from the numbers first and then the craft. Whereas most of us are, were tradespeople first before we became builders. And I read something somewhere. It said most contractors are not entrepreneurs; we're tradespeople who had an entrepreneurial seizure. And and it's like we got to learn the hard way, because we think, well, I know how to build something. I'm a carpenter, or I'm a plumber, or I'm a an electrician, or what have you. And so I'll just open the doors and run a
Yeah.
business. And like for me, for years, it was like I wasn't really running a business. I just had a job, and it was a job that, I had to get I wasn't going to 8 hours a day. I was going to 12 or 14 hours a day.
Sure.
And, you know, then I had to, still do the estimates and the bookkeeping and so
So how where were your leads coming from before? I mean, was it just referrals and word of mouth?
most of what we've done has been referrals and word of mouth. I mean, the VA, the veteran work, we often get from the VA. They're not allowed to recommend anybody, but there's very few contractors that really want to go through the red tape and the paperwork and the bureaucratic um, you know, things you have to go through to get a VA contract. Um,
Can you maybe explain that? Because I'm curious. I'm sure a lot of others are there. Like, what is that full process look like to actually be able to get that contract and do that?
so we
that
have there are three grants that we participate with that for veterans. The largest one is the SAH, the Specially Adapted Housing Grant, and that is available to um, service connected disabled veterans that have a disability that fits within the parameters of the grant. So I mean, it has to be pretty significant. Um, lost both legs, lost one arm and one leg. I mean, that kind of thing, or the use of. We did a new home last year for a double amputee vet that was all wheelchair accessible, and motorized cabinets that come down to countertop level and that kind of thing. But there is a preemption for veterans who have dates of service within the Vietnam era, boots on the ground in Vietnam. So, and those are a lot of the ones that are showing up with major health problems now. But that grant is um, currently $121,000, and goes. It's based on inflation, so it adjusts every year. But the requirements, for that grant, you have to meet the minimum property requirements that they have, for the house and, um, 5-foot turning radius and curbless shower and, direct egress from the bedroom and, pretty significant, list of requirements and pretty significant, um, contract requirements in terms of what has to be spelled out in your contract in order to be accepted.
So are these veterans are they the ones that have already applied and then, once they get
Right.
awarded the grant, they're bringing you in?
Right, they have to do an application process, and there's the part that they have to fill out. They have to, verify their property ownership and their mortgage and, some other things like that, and they have to first qualify in terms of, their level of disability and the medical necessity of the work. Um, and then, they will usually contact us and say, you know, we're, we're looking at this grant and would you come out and take a look and see what you can do for us?
So the VA, they you said they can't
They
recommend, but do they
cannot.
have a list of approved contractors?
They do. You have to get on their list. You have to go
Yeah.
through the application process to be on the list. You have to, um, there's a national database you have to go on to and update and fill out. And so there's a lot of, paperwork kind of stuff
I'm
to do.
I'm curious, do you know how many in your area are on that list?
They they never update the list. There's people that have been out of business for 20 years that are still on the list.
Okay.
Um, but there's really only, a couple that are actively doing the work. I mean, a lot of the projects we've gotten have been where, um, the veterans talking to a contractor who's not familiar with the process and, they're all excited about doing the job, and then they discover, the red tape requirements, and all of a sudden they just quit returning their phone calls.
Sure.
And, they'll call the VA, and the VA will say, "Well, we can't recommend anybody, but, this guy has done a bunch of projects for us."
Mhm.
Um, and then there's 2 smaller grants, the HISA, which is Home Improvement Structural Alteration, that is administered through the VA hospital. And, we do a lot of those, like, when we're doing a smaller project, we're taking out a tub, putting in a shower, um, or something of that nature. And then there's a state grant, um, which is $8,000, and that is, similar to HISA grant. So, and there are cases where we will incorporate all 3 of them into the same project, and that gets complicated because they each have their own timelines and their own requirements. And, um, there's one time we were building an addition, and we built the ramp to the addition before we put up the addition, simply because the grant that was paying for the ramp was about to expire, and so we had to
Hmm.
hurry up and get that done.
So, I mean, obviously, with the smaller grants, the veterans are, also coming out of pocket. I mean, do you see with those larger ones? I mean, are they able to kind of keep their project within that $121,000 scope, or are they often also, coming out of pocket for any additional work?
We've done both. It just depends on the needs, and it depends on the situation. A lot of times they'll tell us right up front that, we don't have any additional funds to put in this project, and so um, we need to keep the scope of work limited so that you know, it'll be paid for with the grant.
Sure.
So it's kind of like estimating in reverse,
Yep.
where you start with, we can't exceed this amount. How much, what can we get done?
Yeah.
And how can we get the most benefit for the amount of money that we're spending? And that's true on a lot of these jobs, even, private pay jobs. People are, they're struggling in their home, and they're struggling getting in and out of the bathroom or up and down the steps or what have you. But, their financial situation is such that, they really can't afford what we would like to do for them. And
Yeah.
so, what can we do that will move the needle for, the amount of funding that we have to apply?
Yeah. that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, what's it like from a kind of actual getting paid out from the grant? I mean, is that are you able to get some funds up front? Are you getting like, deposit and then get kind of progress payments, or you just wait until the very end? Are you having to cash flow this?
No, on the SAH projects, we cannot get a deposit. So, there is that whole, in estimating and project development, which, normally we would have a deposit on private pay jobs. We do a project development agreement and give the people a range. We say we think it's going to be between, this amount and that amount, and then we get a deposit up front to help to offset our estimating and project development costs. But um, on the SAH projects, we cannot get a deposit, but we get like usually 4 or 5 draws. So, we're not cash flowing the whole project, but it certainly is, you have to plan for that. And, we
Yeah,
do a mix of those and, the private pay projects where we're
sure. Have you ever gotten sideways on one of these projects where like you didn't end up getting paid out the full amount?
no.
Okay.
But there was one because and they're doing these now, the compliance inspections, like each draw, you know, now we just send them pictures and, they approve it. But for most of the time we've been doing these, they would have a compliance inspector who would come out, okay, we've completed the rough ends and, they come out and look and take pictures and send it in. We get paid. And this one particular job, I mean, it was at the end of the job, and, this was early on, and we were, in a pretty precarious cash flow situation, and so we really needed that draw. And so we called in the compliance inspector, and, they were on vacation. And then they had a backup compliance inspector, and they were on vacation too. And so I'm freaking out, and so I'm calling, and they brought somebody in and got it done, but it was, yeah, it
Yeah.
it was pretty hairy there for
So what portion of your jobs, kind of or I guess of your sales is coming from the VA versus, just going directly to the homeowner?
it tends to vary. I mean, sometimes they come in waves, but I would say probably maybe a third, somewhere between a third and a half is probably, VA work. And I would say probably 2/3 to 3/4 of our work is accessibility related in one way or another. Um,
Yeah. So when you think about your marketing and how you're going to, really focus and target, the, kind of you because it's kind of two separate targets, I assume, right? Like, I mean, are you targeting veterans specifically, and if they may be eligible for a grant, like, are you providing education, to them? I don't know if they always know that they might have these three potential grants available,
they
like so.
they do not, and in fact, a lot of times when we tell people about it, they don't they're not aware of it. And so, we have, one of my employees belongs to AMVETS, and so we're trying to get, to go in and maybe do some presentations to some of these veteran organizations and then but our broader marketing is more targeted just at the general population that might be, um, considering planning ahead. I mean, we really try to push the idea of think about these modifications before you need them,
Yeah,
because people often they don't want to think about it, they don't want to talk about it, and then, there's a traumatic event of some kind, whether it's a fall or a stroke or yeah, and then all of a sudden um, it becomes an emergency. And so
yeah,
doing doing home modifications or renovations in a state of emergency um, does not produce the best results. I mean, doing
Yeah.
anything in a state of emergency typically
Yeah.
does not
Do
produce. Um,
do you get a lot of those calls?
we do, we
Yeah.
do, and so we get calls like, mom's coming home from the hospital tomorrow afternoon, and we
So what do you do for that?
well, there are some things that we do. I mean, there's the modular aluminum ramps that you can get, in a pretty quick hurry, and sometimes there are there's things that you can do. Depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But we really try to encourage people to plan ahead. And
Yeah.
it's almost exclusively people who have been caregivers who get that and are interested in planning ahead. If I get a call saying, we're healthy, but we're wanting to build our forever home, or we're wanting to make sure our existing home is well suited for us for the rest of our lives. It's almost always somebody who has cared for a parent or cared for someone, and
Yeah.
realized, what that feels like on the other side when you're trying to, help somebody get a bath when the bathroom's not set up for it.
Yeah. Man, well, it's awesome knowing that there are people out there like you, Chris, that are doing this work, and that these are, that are helping the people that, absolutely need it the most. This isn't a luxury. This is a necessity, and you're there delivering for them, which is just, I mean, again, very reassuring, to know that there are great people out there doing this work. I'm curious, where do you see yourself taking the business? What are the goals for, for the business, for Senior Remodeling Experts? Like, where do you want to see it in the next, 5, 10 years?
Well, the prime directive is to get the systemization dialed in, and get the standardization of kind of all of our processes, that process mapping that Anna talked about at that workshop, to where things are moving a lot smoother. And then once that is done, um I'd kind of like to explore the idea of franchising, and making this available um to others, because, it's only going to grow. Our population is aging. There's 10,000 baby boomers a day turning 65. The percentage of people over 65 is set to exceed the number of people under 18 very soon. I'm not sure exactly about the year, but as a society, we're getting older, and most people don't want to, move into senior living. And even if everybody was thrilled about the idea of moving into senior living, there aren't enough facilities for people to do so.
Yeah.
And so the silver tsunami, as it's been called, is, going to be crashing on our shores. And I've been saying for years, there's a tipping point coming. Up until now, those of us in this industry, it's like, well, we got to convince people to plan ahead, and we got to tell people the story, and kind of make the case for why um, turning Peter Pan homes into forever homes is a good idea. And but when that tipping point comes, it's going to be, how in the world do we keep up with this?
Yeah.
And um, so, I mean, the NAHB says that aging in place remodeling is the fastest growing segment of the remodeling industry. And so, like I said, I teach the certification class. I've got a class coming up next month in May, and one in September. And I'd like to get to the point where I'm doing those more often, because I think that's a valuable resource for people who remodelers in particular, and occupational therapists, and a lot of the other people that work with seniors in their homes, to to earn that certification, and to become more familiar with
No.
what the opportunities are in the
I mean,
marketplace.
I love the idea and the thought of, could you franchise this because you're already a natural, teacher, trainer, coach. Like you could help so many others
Mhm.
by doing what you're already doing, but then being able to get them set up, with the tools, the foundation, the systems, the processes. I mean, again, like you could save them so many years of the lessons that you've had to learn
Right.
by getting them those same processes, those same, that education that has taken you a long time to be able to accumulate and the experience. Like, I mean, I totally agree with you. It sounds like the market is ripe. There's tons of demand, and you're in a great position to not only help other builders and entrepreneurs to be able to set themselves up to do this, but again, now you've exponentially multiplied the impact that you can have on this aging community. And so, again, I'm all about, when you find your passion, you find that mission and you've got that vision there, I mean, sky's the limit. Let me know how we can help. I would love to help be a resource or, help you in any way possible to make this vision of yours become a reality because I mean, I think you've done, all of the things that you need to do to be able to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about passion. One of the things I've been really, kind of digging into is the whole idea of, what does it mean to grow older? What does it mean to, and what are our assumptions about that that are maybe false? Um, I'll be 63 in July, and I feel like I'm just now kind of starting to figure out what life is all about. And the idea that we work most of our life doing something that maybe we don't even enjoy doing so that we can spend a few years in retirement, doing what we do enjoy doing. And then so many times you hear about people, they retire and then they kind of lose all their purpose. And so I'm really just exploring that whole idea of, you know, retirement. Is that really, what, or is it, having time to do something that we're really passionate about.
Yeah.
Maybe it's shifting gears, and that's kind of what I'm looking towards of spending more time teaching. And but just in general, of I've been hearing stories about people of advanced age doing incredible things.
Yeah.
Um, and what are our assumptions about aging, and what is that? How can we change that? Can we change that parameter and live lives to the fullest at any age?
Yeah.
I'm inspired by, the story of Caleb in the Bible. He was, one of the 2 spies that went into the promised land and came back and said, "We can take it." And there's a passage that says he was 85 years old, and he was still just as strong as the young guys. And it was attributed to the fact that he viewed the troubles and the challenges and the difficulties of his life as bread. That the hardships, that's bread, that feeds me, that makes me strong, rather than, "Oh gosh, this hardship is so hard and it's so difficult, and, how are we gonna get through it? Woe is me." And so, how much of who we are is our attitude?
Yeah. No, 100% agree. And, and yeah, mindset is everything. It's what you want to choose to do with your time. And, a lot of people just don't necessarily want to kind of keep staying active and taking all the things that get thrown at you every day and kind of overcoming challenges. But like, some people and I think, what a lot of people would tell you is, the more that they do stay active, the more that you keep going, like, it really does. It prolongs your life.
Absolutely.
As soon as you stop, thinking and doing and being active, you start to, slowly die off. And it's like if you've got that passion and that ability to like, not view things as work. I mean, I tell people I haven't worked a day in my life. Like this is my hobby, this is my passion, this is what I want to do every day.
Right.
And that's what fuels me, and that's what like, like it helps me always remember, even in the toughest, most stressful times that, what? I'm doing what I want to do. I'm here because I want to be here, not because I have to be here. And that helps me to not let the stress become overwhelming. It helps me to keep the anxiety at bay. And like, I think when you really know that you're making that choice to keep going and to do something that you want to do,
Right.
now you're fulfilling your own passion, your own, desire. Like, it's your own destiny, your legacy that you get to build. And there's no clock or no time that has to tell you when you got to retire or stop doing stuff. And, I'd love to see you keep going, man. I'd love to see you build out, a whole franchise network of people that, can make a huge impact, across dozens of cities and states. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, well, Chris, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this story. I mean, this is just been such an inspiration to me to hear and to know, what you've gone through and how you have continually overcome, challenges, and you keep, putting the right people in place. You're, making the right moves. You know that sometimes it's not easy. Fear of the unknown is scary, and knowing that, look, if I open up this marketing floodgate, who knows what's going to come, but you know what, we're prepared. We're going to handle it. We're going to adapt. And, I love that about you. I love seeing, your strong, drive and just this intrinsic, desire to help others. And I'm such a big believer that, when you do right by other people, when you do good and you put others first, everything just seems to work out and comes back, to help you and be there for you in the end. But man, it's just very honorable, and I'm proud to say I know you and would consider you a friend and someone that we've, been able to check in, with along the way. But I can't wait to see where you take this business and how big this impact, can be, as you keep building it out, because you're doing a great job, Chris, and it's just an inspiration to me and my team. So thank you for coming on and for sharing that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yep. All right. Well, have a good one,
You
Chris.
too.
We'll see you soon.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Builder Stories. We hope you enjoyed the conversation and gained valuable insights that can help you in your journey along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. And as always, if you or someone you know has a story to share, please contact us at builderstories.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Eric Fortenberry, and remember, every builder has a unique story. Keep building yours.